Okay, hello everyone. Um, this is the last day of the talks. We've just spent the past 5 days chatting with these amazing Material Futures graduates. They've been exhibiting their work, or they are exhibiting their work through the collective of United Matters, which is on Dutch Design Week. And today I am joined by Madeline, Anisha, and Gun to discuss their projects because we are going to be exploring the theme of waste and sort of rethinking our relationship with waste. So, for those of you that haven't joined in the previous days, we're going to have a very relaxed, informal conversation about their work. And towards the end, I'm going to ask the audience to write their questions in the chat. If you have any questions along the way, just write them in because sometimes people forget that they had questions. And then I will make sure to ask them towards the end of the chat. So yeah, I will stop talking and I will let you guys introduce yourselves and your projects.
Okay, so I'm going first, and my project was looking at the waste streams that are occurring around abandoned metal mines in the UK, and how those waste streams are affecting the local ecosystems and a lot of the riverbeds. And over the course of my final year, I went from trying to figure out a way to sustainably remove the metals that are seeping out of the mines into the rivers. And when I realized that really wasn't a sustainable option, then my project took a more activist and like commentary route, and I still continue to find a way to extract the metals and then kind of create a token that was representing the process, which was a coin.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm Gun Kitibanton. So my background is architecture, but my graduation project is focusing on like food system and food waste. So basically, my project is called like a lighter delicacy. So it's a project about turning waste chicken feathers from the poultry industry into like lean edible protein source, which is like basically like slaughterhouses like throwing tons of like chicken feathers all around the world, and all of them just go to the landfill, and it's caused a lot of polluted to our environment. So but actually like inside those like chicken feathers, it has protein which is called like keratin, and inside those keratin component in that feathers is it has like essential amino acid which is part of our body require daily, and it could benefit our health. So I transforming like my project is transforming those like amino acid inside waste stream into edible product, and I added up more kind of like I want to make waste. It has like a quality like kind of meat into it. So basically people like describe a good quality meat that is like melt in the mouth. So like my project also have that quality as well.
Hi, I'm Anisha, and my project was related to electronic waste, and I was looking at how electronic waste is having effects on our earth, and in a lot of amount it is not being reused or recycled or being repaired. So I made a radio out of all the discarded electronic components that you get from the circuit boards. And I specifically focused on electronic components such as capacitors and resistors, because at the moment these components are not being used, they are being discarded, and they are made out of really precious elements which are really difficult to find. So that's why I thought to reuse them to make something new and have a circular system where maybe these components, which are very much reusable, can be made into a new working product.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. I think I'm going to kick off asking the first question, which is you've obviously come at the topic of waste and waste streams from very different angles. So, like, food industry, electronics industry, and I wouldn't know how to call yours, Madeline. Mining industry? Yeah. So I just wonder how did you reach the point where you were like, oh, this is a resource that I can actually work with? What was your process to get to that point? Did you start with a specific topic that you were researching? Was it happy accident? How did you go on about that?
I think for my project, maybe I think I'm generally pretty interested with the waterway systems with wherever I live, like where I grew up. I grew up on the East Coast around the Chesapeake Bay, which is one of the largest I think it's the largest estuary in North America. And when I was growing up, a lot of our like local projects that we would do in school were focused around restoring the bay. And so I think that I'll always be kind of interested in that. And then when I was in Material Futures in London, I guess I was kind of tapping into the waterway systems here and maybe seeing if there was an opportunity for a project. And I think then learning about the history of the mining culture and how there hasn't really been a lot of planning and action with what to do with the mines now that they're not in use. I was able to sort of marry the two topics and create a project.
For me, I was working on a project from first years in Material Futures where I was looking at maybe replacing metal or finding alternative sources where I could already get metal which has already been mined, and I don't have to you don't have to mine it again. So have a system, have a circular loop of metals, and that's how I came upon looking at electronic waste, because electronic waste, like electronics, are made out of so many different elements. It's metal, plastic, and so many precious metals. So I just thought, why not use it, because these electronics are just going to landfills and they're not being done with anything. So yeah, thought, why not give it a go.
Yeah. So for my project, it began from my previous project where I'm looking at the human waste, where I was focusing on hairs. Hair is a keratin based component, and I was thinking, okay, hairs is a waste kind of thing, but when I researched more and more, it drove me into okay, it's such keratin is not from human but it's from animal, that it has more impact to the environment, to the people. So that's it's generally from human hair, but I end up with the chicken feathers. So basically at the early stage of my experimentation, I was thinking I want to create some kind of building material which is related to my background, and also I want to do bioplastic, which is the physical of the aspect of the chicken feathers could strengthen that kind of do those two applications, because the chicken feather is very strong, water repellent, and it's very lightweight. But I felt that most people are working on that area, and I just don't want it I feel like I want to get away from that area. So my focus has been shifted to the chemical aspect of the keratin. So that's on this part, it's led me to use like biodesign and using like small living organism to work with this kind of keratin, and finally I can get extra keratin, like extra protein from that waste. So this is my journey.
And so I guess like your three projects come from an angle which is very much about sustainability. And I think it's fair to say that we find ourselves in a very disastrous situation in terms of our environment, and I think a lot of designers across the globe are sort of rethinking their relationship with materials, with the way that we process materials. And for a very long time, society has lived on the basis of this linear model, which is like take, make, discard. And through your projects, I feel like you're advocating for a much more circular model where waste becomes a resource. And I would imagine that you'd like to keep, those materials within a certain system, within a certain cycle. I would love to know if, maybe bringing it back to your own projects, do you think this is a doable model? Because I actually talked about the topic of scalability with quite a few of you in the past days, and some of the answers were like, oh, but it's much more about being local, keeping things small. But we are so many humans on the planet and we have so much of this waste. Do you think that it's a model that can be scaled up? And maybe don't answer it generally, maybe bring it to your own projects. Madeline, you're on mute.
Okay.
I think almost the only way that we could maybe adopt a plan that would be feasible for cleaning the metals out of the river would be if we scaled it up. I know when I was speaking with an expert, I think that he was kind of saying, like, from an economical perspective, a lot of people are going to be more incentivized to do it if also there's like a monetary resource out of it.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things from my project was that even though the metal is in the river and it is polluting the river, it's still not a lot of metal can create a lot of damage. And so he was kind of saying, like, if there was a way that we could create a network to getting the metal out of all the rivers, or I don't know, it was a little while ago when I had the conversation, but he was just kind of saying it would have to be something that would need to be scaled up to be feasible. Anyways, which is, I think, an answer that we don't always hear. Like you were saying, that we hear a lot more about how things need to be small and localized. But actually, in this case, I think to incentivize people to do it, we would need to collect a lot more metal out of the rivers.
Yeah.
So we would need to find a way to do it on a larger scale. We're quite big.
I think with electronic also, because it's so, I don't know, electronics are made with so many different components, and different components come from different regions because of different kind of metals or different kind of materials that they have. But I think it's very much doable because a big company like Dell is already doing it. They have 90% of their laptops are recyclable, and they have already a loop system in place. I mean, it's not perfect yet, but they are making the initiative, and also they have phased out all the toxic elements that are involved in making electronics. And it took them, I think, just to phase out one of the really toxic element, it took them 5 years to eliminate that. So it takes a long time because the supply chain is so spread out. But I think if companies or designers, they really want to make something sustainable or circular, I think it's very much possible. It's just you need to have that kind of attitude, and I think we need that now, like, especially with all the pandemic and stuff. I think we need to start working on it now.
Yeah, for my project, I think it's be scalable,
Mm.
because like all the technology that I use, all the practice that I use for this project, and also the machinery for like making like edible like alternative protein is very out there. But it's, and I think like people in the food industry is already like knowledgeable about all the processes that I use. And yeah, I didn't use like such a complex technology to making like this kind of like material. And also I just use the existing like machinery knowledge that is already out there, but I just find a new application for it. But that's on the making part. But in terms of the like cultural part, it's kind of hard for my project.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the questions I wrote down, which we might I'll ask you later because I think it's quite interesting. Maybe we can just talk about it now, but just sort of the perception that the audience has around using objects or other materials that come from waste. I wonder, maybe for Madeline and Anisha, it's different, but I wonder for you, Gun, how has the audience taken in the fact that you're creating food out of waste that comes from the feathers of birds?
Yeah, I mean, okay. So I demonstrate all of those facts that like what the benefits that can that like turning West feathers into food could provide for the this world.
Mm.
But like people's all like most of them always had a strong like opinion that okay, most of them saying like right away that oh, this is like disgusting, because they associate with the stigma behind the stories, and they just like it's just such a new thing, like. And also like some of them just don't believe, like actually I prove all those research that I have done, but they just have a bias in their mind. They just like don't believe and don't want to consume. So yeah, it's kind of like it's a such a huge barrier. How would I overcome with that like subjective like things? And those things is quite like personal for me,
Yeah.
because like even like you have so many proof, but if they just don't want to like willing to try or willing to test it, so you can't really do anything.
Yeah.
After that.
But
Yeah, and also like that, and also the factor that like okay, this kind of food that I'm making is not suit with any food trend at the moment. It's not vegan, because it's a product from animal, is and it's not vegetarian either. So yeah, that's kind of like I had to figure it out, like how would I advertise this and what the audience is, a specific audience.
yeah, I was asking a question again that do you think if if you just I don't know make it look pretty, because if anything which looks nice and smells nice, people would be willing to eat it. I think that's the thing with food, right?
Yeah, yes, the thing that I like my first stage, like I want to put my like meat in that stage as a first stage. Like it's I'm right now I mean like according from my research, I try to adopt the pattern how people introduce like edible insects into Western culture, which is like the first place that they put like edible insect is in like very high end restaurant, very fancy presentation, and that's help people to have less disgust and like less like neophobia about food.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think we just need to change the terminology in the sense, because it's not a waste. I mean, it's a resource.
yeah, yeah, it requires so much like knowledge and about like craft processes to making that product. So yeah, we have to like change the whole like perception.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. The fact that maybe it's not only about like shifting cultures around the things that we consume, but also the terminology and referring to things in a very different way. I think might also help shift perceptions around our materials and our waste streams. And as you say, it's not waste; it's resource. And like maybe thinking differently about that and thinking that things can be kept within a cycle will change the way that we actually design and we actually consume. Um, on that note, I have a question for Madeline and Anisha because it's amazing. You guys have sort of taken these materials that come from a very specific waste stream. You've used your skills and your research to sort of repurpose them for different ends, obviously, for different means. Do you think it's also your responsibility to make sure that they don't become waste at the end of their life? Or is that, I mean, I guess your projects are much more about the conversation than the final thing. It's not like you designed a product that you hope to place into the market. But if you had, do you feel that that would be within, your responsibility as the designer?
Yes, I think every designer should have this attitude in mind. They should consider what happens to their product at the end of their cycle, like, because especially for electronic waste, the problem that we have now, because they are not being designed to be used again. So that's why it's creating such a huge problem. And I mean, we are surrounded by electronics now, and they're just piling on. So I mean, definitely, I think, especially, I mean, for my project, it was necessary to have something which is modular, which can be made into something else or added on to something else. And especially working with the components, I tried to make it more easy to be accessible, and so you can, if you want, you can change the circuitry to make something new out of it. So yeah, I think it needs to be modular, and the designer needs to think what happens at the end.
Yeah, and another thing in the middle, like during the design process, that I was noticing, which I guess I know your question is about the end, but is it okay if I talk about it more?
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay,
please.
So because I do think when you're in the middle of the design project, you do accumulate like a lot of waste as you're trying to explore the material and learn about it. And all of us were working on our projects in lockdown. So we did have, we had to think about how we were using our materials in a little bit of a different way, because I think I at least found I didn't quite have that same kind of access to that, like an abundance of materials like I would if I was either at school or just, not in lockdown. And something I was always trying to do when I was making my coin in my flat was like, I just was using the same material over and over again. So I would do a mold, and if it didn't look good, I would decide if it was not what I wanted, and then I would remelt it and use the same thing. And so I wasn't kind of, I think, wasting in the same way, but it also kind of felt riskier because I didn't have like physical representations of the process stage by stage, because I was having to recycle the material over and over again.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. I think like so many of the conversations that we have on the course as well is like, oh, we're doing these projects about sustainability, but like sometimes we forget that we need to embed that as well in our own practice. And I think a lot of the struggles that we have is like, how do you translate that into your everyday life as a designer, and like how do you keep things as wasteless as possible? But yeah, I think that's really good, and maybe it also invites you to reconsider like how you about the process, how do you capture that so that you can communicate it without necessarily meaning that you need a physical output as well for that. So I wonder, like, maybe that also opens up another question, which is like, what were the challenges for the three of you within your projects, and maybe not only about like working with the material, with the waste as a resource, but also within the process. Like, sometimes it's very unpredictable because we choose a waste stream and then suddenly we are encountered with things that we need to solve as we go along the process. So I'd love to know more, like individually, like what were those challenges for you guys?
Well, my project, mine was very site specific, and because I was tackling it in lockdown, I actually couldn't go to the site. So another stage of my project was figuring out how I could yield an identical results of what I would get from the water and how I would do that from the river water and that site, and how I could use materials that I could order from like eBay, and make a coin that would look exactly like what it would look like if I could have gone to the river. So I did, like, I had a professor at Imperial who helped me a little bit with like figuring out which materials I would need, and then looking at data sheets and doing some equations to figure out like how much of my substitute material I would need to get like the exact amount of copper that I would have pulled out of the water at the river. And I think that a really valuable insight that I had with that was that I think sometimes we always feel like we need to visit a site or we need to see something to see we need to visit a site to understand what's going on. And I think it made me realize that I didn't have, like, I could have chosen for another project, I could choose something maybe a little bit further away, and that I wouldn't have to do something in the UK, that I could understand like a waste stream from a river in China or something, just by looking at data sheets and figuring out like how I could sort of yield the amount of like the resource I could pull out of it. And yeah, I just didn't realize how much I could understand a place by doing those kinds of exercises and not having the opportunity to see it or visit it.
For me, it was easy at one side and difficult on the other. Easy because all of us have some kind of electronic which is just sitting in our homes, just doing nothing. So I asked my friends around, if they had any phones that they were not using. But on the other hand, because I needed quite a lot of it, and I needed, maybe like big computers or printers and stuff, so I had to contact different recycling centers, and they just wouldn't get back to me because, they consider this, as toxic waste, so they wouldn't just give this out to you. So yeah, but then I from my university only, like I went to this different kind of administration, and then I was able to get the waste from CSM. But yeah, it is difficult to work with different kind of waste stream, and also in terms of material also, because I was trying to melt down the metal, and I tried contact the different foundries, but they wouldn't just take the metal because they were just like, we just don't know what's in the metal. Like they wouldn't melt down scrap metal because they didn't want to contaminate their kilns, and yeah, there were different kind of complexities involved.
Yeah, for my project was about the keratin extraction process. Like, because like there are so many ways to extract the keratin from the chicken feathers, but I haven't seen like none of them make it to be edible product. So I had to research all of those like viable like extraction process. I have like my assistant who is a professor in Reading University who kind of like helped me prove all those processes. I had to mix it up like some kind of those process. I had to mix it up because I had to prove that it's safe for consumption. Like otherwise you give like a toxic for people to eat, and you can kill people. And also like it has to be less environmental impact, and also cost efficiency, and focusing on the system. I was thinking, okay, there was one day that I visited the slasher house in Thailand. I was thinking, oh, it's easy. It's just like collect those like waste feathers. So I brought a like kind of like a rucksack, like 2 or 3 rucksacks, like from slasher house,
Mm-mm.
and then I bring it home. And at that time, it was like end of the day, and I don't want to do that. Like I just thinking that I'm gonna watch it like later. So like the morning, the after, so it creates methane very easily, and it encourages flies. There was like 100 of flies like in my front yard, and my like neighbors like came and asked like what happened. It's the smell very badly. Like I mean, me and my mom have to help each other and wash it and have to be dry, cause like one is not dry, it's really smelly.
Mm.
So I mean, like that's the thing when you are a designer, you feel that okay, just collect it and someone will do that, but actually there was something that we couldn't see,
Mm-mm.
like have the practice and see the problem.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you guys obviously you need to. There's no written book of like how you can like how you manage these materials, and obviously when you get into the project, it all sounds very easy, but then you have very sort of applied challenges that you need to overcome. Like in your case, not having smelly feathers on your backyard. I'd love for you guys to also maybe talk a little bit more about your final outputs, because I feel that a big part of all of your projects is the story behind those materials, and not only the story of like the huge environmental catastrophe that we find ourselves in and why we should be doing this, but also the journey that you've been on. And I feel that you all chose a very specific final output for a very specific reason, and I'd love for you to explain a bit more the thinking behind that.
Well, for mine, I chose to make a coin out of the metal from the river, and the river that I chose the river in the UK that had the highest content of copper, which was a river down in Cornwall, and it also has even more higher, like very high levels of zinc. So the idea from my project, but I wasn't able to work with zinc in my flat because it's toxic. It's like really toxic. But the inside, I'll get to why I chose the coin in 1 second. The inside of the coin was zinc, or the idea was that the inside would be zinc, and then the outer surface would be copper. And it was kind of coincidental at the time because I chose the river because of its copper levels, but I didn't know as much about the history of coin making. But zinc is actually really a common metal used as the base of the coin. But I chose the coin because it's kind of a universal symbol for value. And also I think that the symbology that is used with coins and the history of coin making, a lot of coins, the designs on them are about commemorating or maybe creating awareness around an event or a period of time. And also if you go back into like history of like Romans and when they were conquering Europe, they would use the resources from the land that they had just conquered, and they would punch coins to pay out the armies that had conquered the land. So I also thought it was a bit of like, I don't know if it was an homage to that, but kind of just using the resources to make an object commemorate an event. Whereas in this case, it was more about creating awareness about an event. It's not something we should really celebrate. But yeah, that's why I chose the coin.
Good.
And for me, first of all, I don't have any kind of background with how electronics are made. And, all the circuitry that goes into making an electronic product work. So I had to kind of start with the basics, and I had a really good expert who kind of helped me make all the circuitry. So I made a radio, which was supposed to be the kind of the simplest kind of circuitry that I could do, but it took me so many months to kind of just make that work. And I think it was also because I wanted to make something which, you know, was able to make a sound, or you could tell that it works.
Mhm.
And also, I mean, during this time, I mean, we were in a pandemic, and you know, radio is the first thing that you would want to use as a communication device if you are in a apocalyptic situation, you know, like so it might be one thing that might be helpful in the future. I don't know, to have communication if you don't have any kind of electricity or internet.
Yeah, for my project, I was like my challenge for making my like final artifact is about like I want to change people perception
Mhm.
on the chicken feathers. So I want to make people think that it is not a cheap source of protein anymore, and it's not waste. And I also follow the pathway how they like introduce like a novel food in the author's culture. So basically, according from the research, it said like if that food has three aspects, which is like innovative, high end, and being checked, so that would help people, that would encourage people to try the new food and have less disgust, as I stated that earlier. So yeah, so I transform those things into my final artifact, which is like innovative, because like I sculpt the structure, the food structure that had pores, like a lot of pores, like spongy structure. That structure could help people to could like I mean like when people like eat that structure will absorb saliva, and it will like melt in the mouth more quicker. So I think that's encourage that aspect of like innovative, that you don't have to always order like a good quality meat which is cost a lot of money, but you can have this as alternative food from West.
Yeah.
And also the presentation, I just like I try to make it nice to make people just forget the stigma from where the material is from.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at time, so I'm gonna ask the audience, the public, to please start writing questions in the chat so I can shoot them over to these guys over here. I'm just gonna ask another question, but in the meantime, please write questions in the chat. So I think good follow up from what you just said, Gun. I'd love to know how important collaboration was within each of your projects. I feel like you all came from a very specific place, and suddenly you've been through this incredible journey. You've suddenly become, you know, master chefs. You've just gone to all of these like rivers, taking out waste from the contaminated water. You've transformed electronics into a new radio, which I don't think any of you imagined you'd be doing this during your second year. How important was collaboration for you guys?
Oh, it was so important. I mean, especially for me, because I couldn't have done this alone. I have no knowledge of, you know, how circuitry works, or, you know, how electronic components work. So it was really, really important for me. Otherwise, at the end, I would have no project if it wasn't, you know, my collaborator who helped me do this whole thing. I mean, during the lockdown, we used to have video calls for 4 hours every day, kind of to, you know, just to make the circuitry. I mean, which was really nice that he, you know, helped me through video call to do this. but I feel it was really, really important for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a project.
Mine was, I would say, collaboration was really important. I mean, I wouldn't have been even able to get the data sheets without collaboration.
Mm.
Because I had to contact someone in the environmental agency. I wasn't able to find the information about sort of river metal content just on the internet. And also having some help figuring out kind of an alternative of how to maybe approach my project and the process in lockdown. That was really helpful. I also think collaboration is just really nice because it's nice to have, I don't know, I really enjoy being part of a team. And I think in second year, it's really easy to feel like you're all by yourself in this. And I think when you are working with people who are invested in your idea, it can fuel you as a designer because I think, I don't know where I'm going with it, but yeah.
It gives traction to your project, right? Like just having people around you gives you the energy.
Yeah.
For you, Gun?
Yeah, for me, collaboration for me is very like important because like my background has no like relation on what I'm doing right now. So I like have zero knowledge about biology, about food or everything. Which is I think like all of those collaboration from the scientific part and also the practice part is very help me building the thesis more stronger. So I have to thank all of those collaborators as scientists like GEM in CSM. And also, I think my project is about building people trust because the papers also already show that it's safe for consumption, but it's a huge collaboration about making like film that I think that those collaboration help a lot on my project to make people kind of like interest in my project more and also think it's like it's believe in the project in a way. So that's kind of in the short film that I create is show about all the context that like it has to be like the farmer has to change their like routine, not only slaughter the chicken, but also it have to dry it out and go for harvesting. And also the chef had to work in different way. So I think the collaboration project and the narrative, which is I collaborate with like a filmmaker. This a whole narrative help a lot on my project.
Yeah. So we have a really good question from one of the members of the public, which is if you could create a new terminology of what you are doing instead of just saying design, what would that be? I think that's a really good question because I think that's like one of the biggest questions of that we ask ourselves probably when we finish Material Futures as a course and in general I think as a designer that's working in research, right? But over to you guys. How would you name what you do if it's not a designer or design?
That's a difficult question.
Like rediscovering or reallocating resources. I mean, that sounds really bland, but.
And also like problem solver, maybe.
Problem solver.
Or I don't know, remaker or I don't know.
Because maybe do you think that it's a difficult one, right? Because I think like there's it isn't really design in the traditional sense of design where you're making a radio, you're making a coin, you're making just food. It's like it's way more about the story behind it, and it's almost like you've had to adopt so many different codes within your project. So I just wonder, like, if you had to give a strapline to someone to tell them what it is you do, what would that strapline be?
I mean, now I usually say, if I'm applying to a job or something, I say I'm a multidisciplinary designer. I mean, I am still a designer, but I'm not. I mean, I have my background in fashion, but now with Material Futures, because we have touched upon so many different projects and so many different areas, so in a way, it's it's a multidisciplinary community. I don't know.
Yeah.
I also think I don't know if I think I agree with Anisha, like I think having the design word in there, but I know I still think about my project and as also a bit of an activist piece, but I think I want people to look at the idea of activism to be really paired with awareness. It doesn't, it's because I always think of activism as being really like loud and about protesting and I don't know. I almost think, yeah. And I do think that our work is also a form of activism and awareness, and I would like people to kind of recognize activism, in our work.
Yeah.
I don't.
You don't know.
I'm still like.
It's a hard question. It is.
No.
It is. But I think it's also it's more a conversation, right? That like we keep going back to. I still struggle to tell my family what I do over Christmas, so yeah, it doesn't really go away. I think.
Like being this caught make me figure out that I don't want to go back to like architecture field, but I don't want to be a chef either, and I don't know. It's kind of like I just if there's a problem, I will like easily to answer, but to describe myself at the moment, it's hard.
Okay. If anyone has any more questions, please shoot them over. I'm gonna ask you the last question that I have on my list, and actually I asked all of your colleagues from Material Futures, but seeing that we're still in an ongoing pandemic, and it's very likely that we will be facing new restrictions, and we might even be going into lockdown. I really hope not. Do you have any advice for new designers that have just graduated, new designers that are starting their studies, or even just designers in general, from your experience of developing your project? And then hopefully settings. Yes, we should be back.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're back. Excellent connection. We're live stream. Okay. So sorry, my internet just died. I was asking them for a word of advice. Make sure your internet connection is working. Maybe over to you guys. What would you recommend people to do if they're designers in lockdown?
I think my advice, according from my strength is like keep experimenting, because I think and don't be afraid of the failure, because like for example, all the food that I made, like sometimes I didn't expect any kind of quality, but I just can't really imagine what was gonna come out of the experimentation, but I think most of that, like when I did the experimentation, and then I just know, okay, what I have to develop after that, and it's kind of like I'm being like bottom up designer.
Mm.
So I think I'm not a designer who see the overall and just like scoping down. That's what I'm doing. So I'm building something from the very like smaller things, put it together and just building it out. So I think just don't be afraid of the failure, because like all the failures are all the research that you can't really find it online or somewhere else, and you only the one who gather all those research, I would say.
What about you two? Anisha
Mm.
and Maddie?
I was saying before, I was thinking like in lockdown, there were two things. One, and this is like kind of cheesy, but like when you're designing in lockdown, I think that there is, for some reason, I felt like there was a lot of this creativity pressure put on, because you were like, oh my god, you have this opportunity to like do something amazing. And I think that sometimes that pressure really got to me, and I almost just think be really like be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
And then never like always try something a second time or a third time, like Gun was saying, because there were also moments where I would try a process and I would think it through, and I thought it seemed like it would work, and then I would give it a go and it would look horrible. And then all I needed to do was maybe like just kind of take some notes and then try a couple more times, and you learn just a little bit more about the process and ways that you can maybe like control or impact like how a material is going to shape or what it's going to do. And that like path of discovery is really interesting, lockdown or not in lockdown.
Yeah.
And maybe also just don't get too bogged down in like, oh, if I wasn't in lockdown, I could do all of these things, because I think feeling like that is not really helpful.
Yeah, it doesn't help. I think it's better if you just accept it and just move forward. But yeah, I think I would say with my project, like I had to do a lot of ad hocism in a way, like looking at mundane objects and thinking of what other things that they could do. So being creative with the things that you have at home, and you don't really have to go out and just make different kind of things out of them, and just as they both said, like trying and trial and error is basically the best, and just enjoying the whole process, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I mean, well done, because I know it hasn't been the easiest of times, and I think you guys had quite complicated projects in the sense that you relied heavily on expertise from the outside world to actually be able to process your materials, to be able to work with your materials, and to craft them into an end product. But I do think that you guys did really, really well. Like, it was really great to see your journey. So I think you should be extremely happy with what you've done. And yes, I'm going to wrap up this conversation now. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Martha.
No, thank you. It was really good to see you guys, even if it was on the screen. And yeah, I would suggest that anyone that's watching go to the Dutch Design Week page with these guys. I don't know how long it's going to be live for. Do you know, Anisha or Maddie?
It's till 25th of October.
So you still have 4 days.
Yes.
And otherwise, the United Matters Instagram is still going to be active after that. So, and the website, so that you can always go back and check the projects. So yeah, thanks so much. I'm gonna stop the live stream. You guys stay online for me. But yeah, you can say bye to all of your audience.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for
Bye.
coming.
Oh my god.